English fleet sails proudly across the Bay of Biscay in the summer of 1372. Their decks groan under the weight of substantial sums of silver to pay troops, thousands of soldiers ready for battle, and the heavy burden of decades of unchallenged confidence. For over 30 years, England had ruled the waves, its converted merchant cogs towering over enemies like unassailable fortresses, its longbowmen a terror from the fields of Flanders to the shores of Normandy. But this time, the sea would not bend to their will. Waiting in the treacherous waters outside La Rochelle's fortified harbor was a sleek and deadly Castilian fleet, commanded by a cunning admiral and armed with a revolutionary approach to naval warfare drawn from Mediterranean traditions. What unfolded over 2 brutal days was a disaster so total and unrelenting that it shattered England's hard-won maritime supremacy and forever redrew the balance of power in the 100 Years' War. This is the story of the Battle of La Rochelle, a naval clash that proved strategy and innovation could triumph over brute force and outdated tradition. The war in context. The 100 Years' War was not one long, continuous war, but rather a sprawling series of conflicts between England and France, stretching from 1337 to 1453. At stake was nothing less than the French crown itself, along with control of lucrative trade networks and the immense wealth of fertile lands like the Duchy of Aquitaine. By the 1360s, the fortunes of the war had begun to shift dramatically in ways that few could have predicted. England, under the bold leadership of King Edward III, and later his renowned son Edward, known as the Black Prince, had enjoyed a string of stunning victories on land, including the triumphs at Crécy in 1346 and Poitiers in 1356, where captured French kings became trophies of English prowess. At sea, the Battle of Sluys in 1340 had smashed the French navy into splinters, leaving England unchallenged in the English Channel. This dominance meant supplies, reinforcements, and even royal expeditions flowed easily across the water, sustaining England's continental ambitions. But France had not surrendered its claim. King Charles V of France, nicknamed the Wise for his shrewd intellect, avoided the rash, decisive battles that had cost his predecessors so dearly. Instead, he wore England down methodically with careful strategy, opportunistic alliances, and precise targeted strikes against vulnerable outposts. He leaned heavily on powerful allies, most importantly, the Kingdom of Castile, a rising naval power in the Iberian Peninsula with a fleet unmatched in the Western Seas, bolstered by Genoese shipbuilding expertise and galley designs honed in the Mediterranean. By 1372, Charles V and his Castilian partners saw a golden opportunity to deal England a devastating blow that could cripple their operations in France. The target, the strategically vital port city of La Rochelle. Why La Rochelle mattered. La Rochelle was more than just another French harbor along the rugged Atlantic coast. It was a true jewel, rich in commerce, well defended by towering walls and a natural harbor, and strategically positioned in the Bay of Biscay to command the sea lanes. Whoever held it controlled the bustling trade routes to Spain, Portugal, and even the distant markets of the Mediterranean and beyond. It was also a critical gateway into the heart of Western France, providing any invading army with a secure landing ground free from the perils of open beaches or hostile shores. For England, La Rochelle was absolutely vital to maintaining its precarious hold on Aquitaine, the vast and wealthy duchy that formed the backbone of English power and prestige on the continent. Losing it would mean not only the catastrophic loss of trade revenues, but also a gaping, dangerous hole punched straight through their defenses, exposing their southern flanks to French counterattacks. By the early 1370s, La Rochelle's loyalty to England was wavering like a flag in a gale. Many of its merchants and citizens, weary of heavy English taxation, arbitrary interference in local affairs, and the endless drain of the war, had begun to lean sympathetically toward France. Desperate to secure the city and bolster its garrison, the English crown dispatched a major fleet under the command of John Hastings, the Earl of Pembroke, loaded with reinforcements, war materiel, and, crucially, a vast sum of silver coins to pay the long-suffering English troops stationed in the region. But lurking in secret, positioned for ambush amid the misty approaches to the harbor, were Castile's swift war galleys under the masterful command of Ambrosio Boccanegra, a Genoese-born admiral with a reputation for tactical brilliance. The commanders: John Hastings, Earl of Pembroke young, ambitious, and burning with the desire to prove himself on the grand stage of war. John Hastings, the Earl of Pembroke, was only in his mid-20s when he was entrusted with this high-stakes mission. He was undeniably brave, with a noble lineage that traced back to the royal house, but he was painfully inexperienced in the arts of naval command, having spent more time in tournaments and land skirmishes than on the open sea. His fleet, numbering about 40 ships according to contemporary estimates, was composed mostly of converted merchant cogs, large, high-sided vessels that were sturdy and capacious for carrying cargo or troops, but dreadfully unwieldy in battle. They were packed with hundreds of knights in gleaming plate, seasoned men-at-arms, and sharp-shooting archers, but equipped with precious little in the way of dedicated naval artillery or tools for ship-to-ship combat. Ambrosio Boccanegra. On the opposing side stood Ambrosio Boccanegra, a skilled and battle-tested admiral hailing from one of Genoa's most powerful mercantile families, renowned for their seafaring prowess. Unlike the novice Pembroke, Boccanegra was a professional sailor and master strategist, having cut his teeth in the cutthroat naval rivalries of the Italian city-states. He commanded around 22 to 30 Castilian galleys, vessels that embodied the pinnacle of Mediterranean naval design, low in the water for stability, sleek and narrow for speed, and powered by a combination of billowing sails and banks of sweating oarsmen. This hybrid propulsion gave them unmatched maneuverability, especially in the confined and tide-swept waters near La Rochelle's approaches. His crews were elite, trained crossbowmen who could loose deadly quarrels with pinpoint accuracy, and hardy sailors hardened by the brutal close-quarters style of warfare that dominated the Mediterranean. This impending clash would be no mere contest of raw numbers or brute strength, but a profound test of ship design, tactical ingenuity, and hard-won experience on the unforgiving sea. The English fleet arrives. In June 1372, after a grueling voyage, Pembroke's fleet finally reached the choppy waters outside La Rochelle, though contrary winds and fickle currents had slowed their arrival, fraying tempers and testing the patience of the crews. The ships were heavy laden with soldiers eager for action and the clinking weight of silver. But this very burden made the cogs even more cumbersome, like elephants trying to dance. When they finally approached the harbor's mouth, sails straining against the breeze, the English lookouts spotted the Castilian fleet lying in wait, arrayed like wolves among the shallows. To Pembroke and his overconfident captains, the enemy galleys appeared smaller and seemingly weaker, mere oar-driven barges compared to the towering bulwarks of English might. Confidence surged through the decks. The English believed their imposing cogs, combined with the devastating hail of arrows from their elite longbowmen, would make quick work of these foreign interlopers. They were about to learn, in the harshest possible way, just how gravely mistaken they were. The battle. Day 1, June 22nd. The first day of the battle opened with tense, deliberate maneuvering under a hazy summer sky. The English cogs, entirely reliant on the wind for propulsion, lumbered forward ponderously, their massive hulls cutting through the waves like reluctant plowshares. In contrast, the Castilian galleys darted in and out like schools of predatory fish, their oars flashing as they loosed disciplined volleys of crossbow bolts that hissed through the air toward the English decks. The English longbowmen, famed for their accuracy on solid ground, tried valiantly to respond, drawing their mighty yew bows and sending shafts arcing toward the enemy. But the relentless rocking of the ships in the swell, combined with the frustrating distance, blunted their deadly precision. Worse still, The Cogs' towering high decks made it nearly impossible to aim downward at the low-slung, swift-moving galleys skimming the surface. Meanwhile, the Castilian crossbow bolts rained upward relentlessly, striking archers, sailors, and officers exposed on the open decks, sowing chaos and thinning the ranks. As the fighting dragged on through the afternoon, with smoke from the first small fires curling into the sky, the battle's momentum began to shift inexorably. The heavy English cogs, utterly at the mercy of the wind and the treacherous currents of the Bay of Biscay, started to drift apart from one another, their formations unraveling like a poorly knit tapestry. The galleys, however, powered relentlessly by their oarsmen, could maintain perfect position and press their attacks without pause, circling like vultures to exploit every weakness. By nightfall, as the sun dipped blood-red into the horizon, the English fleet was battered, bloodied, and deeply demoralized. They had inflicted precious little damage on the elusive Castilians, while suffering grievous losses in men and materiel themselves. The Battle, Day 2, June 23rd. The second day dawned with a sense of grim inevitability, bringing outright catastrophe to the English. At first light, the Castilian fleet surged forward aggressively, their galleys slicing through the water in coordinated packs. They swarmed around isolated English ships like a storm of hornets, first peppering them with withering crossbow volleys to weaken resolve and clear the decks, then closing in for the kill. When a cog showed signs of faltering, its sails torn, its crew reeling, the Castilians threw heavy grappling hooks to haul the galleys alongside, splintering wood and tangling rigging. From their low decks, Boccanegra's soldiers could leap aboard with ease, swarming over the rails in waves. The English cog's lofty sides, once a defensive advantage, now became a deadly hindrance, preventing easy counterattacks or retreats. The confined, blood-slicked decks turned into nightmarish killing grounds, where Castilian sailors and professional soldiers overwhelmed the exhausted English defenders in brutal hand-to-hand melees of swords, axes, and daggers. Some English ships erupted in flames as pitch and oil were hurled aboard, the fires spreading hungrily through dry timbers and canvas. Others were rammed at full speed by the galleys' reinforced prows, their hulls holed below the waterline and sinking in panicked frenzy. One after another, the proud cogs were boarded, captured, or sent to the bottom. Soldiers who fought to the last were cut down without mercy. Others, in desperation, leapt into the cold, churning sea, only to drown under the weight of their armor. The precious silver, meant to fund and sustain the defense of Aquitaine, was seized as war booty, a humiliating prize for the victors. Pembroke himself was captured amid the melee, possibly wounded in the chaos, along with hundreds of his knights and men-at-arms. By the battle's brutal end, nearly the entire English fleet lay destroyed or in enemy hands, a floating graveyard adrift in the bay. The aftermath. The defeat at La Rochelle was nothing short of catastrophic, a wound that festered for years. England lost, by most accounts, up to 40 ships, either sent to the seabed or captured as prizes. Thousands of seasoned men, dead in the fighting or languishing as prisoners. A vast fortune in silver coins, the lifeblood intended to pay and motivate their troops across Aquitaine. Their cherished aura of invincibility at sea, cracked beyond repair. For the French and their Castilian allies, the victory was nothing less than triumphant, a surge of vindication after years of setbacks. La Rochelle shifted firmly and irrevocably into French hands, its harbor now a bastion for continental operations. Charles V seized the momentum with ruthless efficiency, launching campaigns to reclaim swaths of territory in Aquitaine and exploiting England's suddenly vulnerable supply lines. For England, the blow landed with equal parts material devastation and psychological ruin. The sea, once their trusted highway of conquest and resupply, had become a treacherous graveyard strewn with wreckage. Never again in the 14th century would they enjoy the same unchallenged level of dominance they had savored since the glory days after Sluys. why La Rochelle changed everything. Decline of English naval supremacy. For 3 full decades, England had held the seas in an iron grip, their fleets an extension of royal will. La Rochelle shattered that era decisively, proving their vaunted armadas could be not just beaten, but beaten badly and decisively by a more nimble foe. Rise of Castile as a naval power. The victory announced Castile's dramatic arrival as a true maritime force to be reckoned with. Their galleys, inspired by Genoese and Mediterranean designs, now roamed the Atlantic with bold confidence, tipping the precarious balance of power firmly in favor of France and her allies. A lesson in technology and adaptation, England's stubborn reliance on bulky, wind-dependent cogs and the land-proven might of longbows proved disastrously outdated in this aquatic arena. Castile's galleys demonstrated the irreplaceable value of speed, superior maneuverability, and the disciplined professionalism of dedicated naval warfare. Turning point in the 100 Years' War, with vital supply lines severed and morale across the ranks profoundly shaken, England's tenuous grip on Aquitaine began to weaken like a fraying rope. Over the coming decades, France would claw back more and more territory, inch by bloody inch, setting the stage for their eventual resurgence. Voices from the battle. Imagine the raw terror of being an English archer, trapped and exposed on a Cogs' crowded deck as deadly crossbow bolts whistle upward like vengeful hornets, your own arrows plummeting harmlessly short into the waves. Or picture the grueling exertion of a Castilian rower, muscles burning as you pull at the oars with grim determination, your galley surging forward into a hail of enemy fire, the clash of steel and screams echoing over the water. This was no abstract contest of strategy and politics. It was lived horror, etched in blood and salt spray. Contemporary chroniclers captured the disaster with palpable shock and dismay. The famed English and French historian Jean Froissart wrote vividly of England's stunned humiliation, their once unassailable arrogance at sea utterly broken in a single, savage encounter. For French writers of the era, it was a moment of pure triumph, a long overdue reversal of the humiliations inflicted at Crécy and Poitiers, a divine turning of the wheel. Legacy. Though overshadowed today by the thunderous land battles like Agincourt or the chivalric drama of Poitiers, the Battle of La Rochelle deserves to be remembered as a decisive naval turning point in medieval history, often less celebrated due to its maritime focus amid a war dominated by tales of knights and fields. It marked the sharp decline of England's early dominance on the waves and highlighted the growing, urgent importance of naval innovation in an age of expanding empires. Centuries later, England would finally adapt to these harsh lessons, investing in faster, purpose-built warships with advanced rigging and broadside tactics that would one day turn the tide against the mighty Spanish Armada in 1588. But back in 1372, they paid a terrible price for clinging too long to outdated methods, a cautionary tale writ in splintered oak and sunken gold. The Battle of La Rochelle was more than just a crushing defeat. It was a stark and unforgiving wake-up call to the perils of complacency. It proved that no power, however mighty and battle-hardened, could rest indefinitely on the laurels of past glories. England's towering cogs and peerless longbowmen were simply no match for Castile's nimble galleys and their professional, oar-driven sailors. It was the day the sea itself turned against England, its moods and currents conspiring with human cunning, and the inexorable tide of the 100 Years' War began to shift toward the French horizon. And that's the full story of the Battle of La Rochelle, 1372. England's crushing naval defeat that changed the course of a century-long struggle. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's forgotten turning points, hit that like button, share this video with fellow history buffs, and subscribe for more epic stories from the past that bring the chaos of battles to life. What battle do you want to see covered next? Perhaps Agincourt's longbows or the Armada's fiery end? Drop your ideas in the comments below. Your suggestion could inspire our next video.